All right, good evening, all of my wonderful Fiveable teachers, new APUSH teachers everywhere. I am Nicole Donahue, your Fiveable APUSH streamer for the evening. I hope everybody's having a fantabulous evening so far. Couple of things as we get going. For those of you that have already joined, I think we're waiting for a couple of people to still join in with us. Feel free to introduce yourself in the comments. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screens, there's a comments section where you can sort of type out things for each other or for me. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's an area where you can ask questions where it says ask a question. If you look at the very bottom, it also says polls. I have started a poll for you. So if you want to tell me how ready you are for the new school year, I have everything from what do you mean there's a new school year to I'm totally ready for my kids to get here, which I feel like most of us are maybe not quite there yet. My classroom is not quite Pinterest ready. But that said, let's move into the crux of what our evening is about, because some of you that are here are not like veteran APUSH teachers. So here at Fiveable, we're trying to get you ready for this new year of stuff that you may or may not be totally prepared for. So going into this, let's see, click. Now it's not going to click for me. There we go. APUSH for new teachers. If you have anything this evening that you're like, ooh, I have questions about that you didn't quite get to or that I thought of later, if you want to follow me on Twitter or ask me on Twitter, my name is Nicole Donahue. My Twitter is @NicoleDonahue, so that's pretty easy to find. And then, of course, we want you to be following our Fiveable Twitter accounts as well, which are, of course, it's not going to click. There we go. @ThinkFiveable. So you can follow @ThinkFiveable on Twitter. You can follow them on Instagram, on YouTube, on all of the social media platforms. So make sure that you are following Think Fiveable for all the updates for you, for your students, for all of our study sessions, for all of the new fun updates that are coming out. There's all kinds of opportunities for your students. I saw that we have scholarship opportunities. So all these different kinds of things that are coming up for you and your kids are going to be up on our social media. So make sure that you are up and following that sort of stuff. But jumping into the reason that we are here, we need to be talking about the very basics of the APUSH curriculum. Now, College Board's curriculum is sort of broken down into a variety of things. Like you have content and then you have skills. And we're going to talk about a couple of those things. Like it's not all content and it's not all skills. And if you're focusing on one or the other, your kids are not really going to get a whole picture of what their year should look like. So in terms of the things that you need to focus on, you really have to focus on both. So let's walk through the basics of what the curriculum actually looks like. So first are the periods. So if you've been to an APSI or if you've looked at the curriculum framework, which if you don't know what I'm talking about by curriculum framework, you can just literally Google APUSH curriculum framework and it will pop up. But this is College Board's guide for you. It's their way of showing you here's what you should be teaching. And more importantly, here's what's on the test. Because at the end of the day, it's about what's on the test. So there are 9 units or 9 periods that College Board is teaching. And the way that they came up with this, if this wasn't explained to you in APSI or if it wasn't explained to you by your coworkers or teachers that you're working with, is that College Board worked with a series of college professors and history teachers to figure out what time frames historians look at as sort of a baseline for how we should divide up history, because there's a lot of contention over when does the Cold War start? When does it end? When does the early republic start? When does it end? When should we have periods that start and end is really what we're talking about. And so they came up with these time periods that sometimes overlap. So for example, if you look at units 4 and 5, you have 1800 to 1848, but then it backtracks to 1844 and goes to 1847. So the periods don't necessarily go one to the next, to the next, to the next. Some of it is meant to be more thematic. So, for example, Unit 1 or Period 1 is the era of sort of pre-Columbus, which is 1491. So 1492 is Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as we teach our kids in like elementary school. Then 1491 is essentially anything before that. So 1491 is pre-Columbus to 1607, which is Jamestown. So that very early colonial period, essentially what Period 1 is. And then Period 2 would be colonial period 2, the French and Indian War, 1754. And then Period 3 is going to be essentially that Revolutionary era. So 1754, the end, or sorry, not the end, but the French and Indian War through the Revolution of 1800, or the election of Jefferson. And then you have sort of the market revolution, where you have 1800 to 1848, which is roughly Polk. And then you have 1844 to 1877, which is Polk's presidency through the Compromise of 1877. So that's really sectionalism, getting into the Civil War all the way through Reconstruction. Period 6 then being the end of the Civil War all the way through the Spanish-American War. So this is really the Gilded Age, industrialization, all of that sort of stuff happening there. And then we have Period 7 picking up with things like imperialism, going all the way through into World War II. So that's huge. I mean, that's imperialism. It's World War I. It's the Roaring '20s. It's the Great Depression, the New Deal, all of that. So Period 7 is like massive. And then you have the Cold War, essentially, and then 1980 to the present. So just as sort of a baseline. So when you see that they're overlapping, that's not like College Board has gotten confused on the dates. They're sort of thematic in that way. And that's done very intentionally. So, hi, Sean. And so when you're looking at that sort of stuff, it's very good for your kids to know that, because when College Board gives them dates in their essays, which they always do, they're trying to tell them something with those dates. And so if they get an essay that's 1800 to 1848, they're really trying to tell them this is about the market revolution. This is about innovation, versus looking at something that is about sectionalism. So the dates are there to actually tell you something important, and that's good for our kids to know. So it's good for you to also know that when you're looking at those dates. So those are the periods. And those are weighted differently on the exam, like our pre-Columbian to early colonization period and then 1980 to the present are weighted smaller than the rest of the things. And I'm not going to read all of these to you because you're smart people and you can read. This does not necessarily mean that those are not going to be tested. A lot of times I think people are like, oh, that's a small part of the test. It's not going to show up anywhere. And that is not the case. Like, you're not going to get a DBQ that's only about pre-Columbian societies, but that doesn't mean that it won't be on a DBQ. It doesn't mean that it won't be on an SAQ. So don't be fooled into thinking that it's not going to be on there, because it very much can. It just means that that's not going to be the entirety of what that is. So be very careful about the way that you're approaching those sorts of numbers. These are sort of waiting more for College Board than for you to play a guessing game on what's going to be on the test and what's not. And the same for your kids. They try to play that game too. In terms of themes, on this slide, I have this thing on the bottom because as APUSH teachers, a lot of times we like to talk about the old test. And so on the old test, as of last year, we used to have, in terms of themes, a theme called Culture and Society. College Board, as of this year, has updated that and split that Culture and Society theme into two separate themes because it was like really broad. And so they've actually split it into two, which is American and Regional Culture, and then social structures. So if you hear people talking about the old theme of Culture and Society, just know that that's what those two things are. But people love to harken back to the olden days of APUSH all the time. So I don't want you to be confused as to what that was. So just to quickly go through these, on the left-hand side of the screen, I've literally just copied and pasted what's in the curriculum framework. And then on the right-hand side, I've given you practical examples of what that looks like. Because a lot of times I think we look at these and we're like, that's cool, but I don't exactly know what that means for my test. I don't know what that looks like in terms of teaching this for my kids. So in terms of American and national identity, this is the one that a lot of people are like, I have no idea how to teach this in my class. Like, this is a really conceptual sort of thing. Like, what does it mean to be an American? And so we see this a couple of times throughout our curriculum. I mean, you see it a lot of times, but like really solidly, one of the times that we see this is the transition from colonists to Americans. So like after the French and Indian War, you see this real battle between, not like shooting battle, but you see this battle like in the hearts of the colonists of like, these British people don't really treat us like British people. Like they don't see us like they see themselves. And so really that idea that maybe we are not like these people. And so really that transitional period is one of these times that we can look at it that way. Another time that we look at this is the decision of who is and isn't a citizen. So things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, things like when you see nativism in terms of Irish and German immigrants is another great example. Who does and doesn't get to be an American and at what point in time and why are really great examples of American and national identity. And then another great example of this is during especially World Wars I and II, patriotic propaganda, which the kids just love because it's just like, woo, America, all the time. And so you see a lot of this there, that you have this very, very strong sense of self when it comes to American national identity. But otherwise, it's sort of here and there, but these are the strongest points that we tend to see this in the curriculum. Let's see, next slide. Work exchange and technology. This one's a lot easier to see. And this is really a large category. And this one I think is one of the easier ones for kids to pinpoint because they really like the technology aspect, especially when it comes to like airplanes and machine guns and all of that sort of stuff. But really what we want them to do is connect the technology to other things. So if they're just looking at technology because it's cool, that's not necessarily what we're going for. So when you're crafting things like short answer questions, or when you're doing things like grading essays, you should really be looking for that technology to be connected to something else. So the invention of the light bulb leads to longer work days. And how does that affect workers? How does that lead to unions, that sort of thing? Or government interventionism or not in labor relations. So technology, work, exchanges, how do these things interconnect with each other, not just seeing them as they are individually. In terms of geography and the environment, this one starts pretty early. I mean, you start with your early Native American societies and you really go from there. The number one thing that I teach with our pre-Columbian societies is where do they live? What do they do for a living in terms of, are they mostly fishing? Are they agricultural? Are they hunting and gathering? Like, what do they do? And a lot of that is contingent upon their environment. How do they affect and are they affected by their environment? So this is one that you can hit really early and then keep moving on with. So other examples, overproduction of the soil is a major cause of the Dust Bowl. That's a really easy one to hit on because it's like really obvious. Inventions like air conditioning make it easier for people to live in areas that were not hospitable. Like I'm sitting in Texas and tomorrow it's supposed to be 100 degrees outside. I would not be in Texas if I didn't have air conditioning. I would be somewhere like Alaska. Migration of large numbers of settlers decimate local animal populations. The buffalo is like the number one that we see here. But if you live in a state that has other examples of this, or like Nevada, for example, I know has like tons of examples of this with dams and other examples of irrigation, then power to you if that's something that you can fill in with your kids with local history. Anytime you can fill it in with local history, do that because it'll be so much more meaningful to your kids. Like my kids love complaining about the air conditioning thing, especially when the air conditioning goes out. In terms of migration and settlement, this is another one that tends to be pretty easy because this is something that if your kids took AP World History, they're pretty familiar with the idea of at least push and pull factors because they hit this a lot, especially if they took like AP Human Geo and then they took AP World History. You say push and pull factors and they're like, I got this. No worries, guys. So push and pull factors are a big one in AP US History. Hi, Tan. In terms of AP US history, you have really two major waves of immigration that we're hitting. You have old immigration, which happens in the market revolution, and then you have new immigration that happens more or less in the Gilded Age. Something that I really hit on with my kids is that the market revolution, which is period 4, and the Gilded Age, which is period 6, are almost like mirrors of each other. So in terms of innovation leading to labor problems, in terms of immigration, in terms of reform movements, all of these different things, you have almost mirrors of each other, and they're just interrupted by the Civil War in the middle, essentially. And so if you can help them remember those things that way, then that's really helpful. But old immigration being your Irish and Germans, and then new immigration being mostly people from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so when you're thinking of like essays, comparison essays on these two groups is like amazing. If you're looking for readings for immigration history, hit me up on Twitter and I can give you the name of a book, which I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but I assign it to my kids and they love it. Migration and settlement, immigration always leads to nativism every single time. That's a good connection that you can make for your kids. Anytime you can make those sort of like definitive claims, it's really nice for them. Like I also teach that economic panics are always caused by speculation, because it's easy to remember, and economic panics are really hard to teach. And then migration and settlement, almost every time you have conflict with Native Americans. The way that I tend to teach conflict with Native Americans is as a backwards timeline. So like if you think of the map of the United States as a backwards timeline, you start east and you go west. So if they're not sure which Native Americans we're fighting with, think of it as a timeline. Go west. So in the early period, we're fighting with like Algonquins, and then you're talking about like the Cherokee down in Georgia by the time you get to Jackson, and then you're talking about the Plains Indians or the Sioux by the time we're getting to the Civil War Reconstruction era, and then you keep moving west from there. And so think of it sort of like a backwards timeline that way, and it sort of helps to keep them chronologically in check with that one. But again, they tend to get this one because if they took AP World, which a lot of them have, then they have a lot of those connections from there, which is always nice. Thanks, AP World teachers. Da, 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 da. Click, click. Nope, not going to click again. That's cool. Oh, technology. Love it till you hate it. In terms of politics and power, this is one that tends to be easy for teachers to teach and that students just find super boring because it's like laws. So in addition to laws, which I mean, there are tons of laws that we need to teach, especially like our civil rights laws when we get to the 60s and all of that sort of stuff. You have Supreme Court cases that are important to know. I think the only 3 Supreme Court cases that are mentioned specifically in the curriculum framework, unless I'm wrong, which I have not double checked on the new one, and that's my bad, is the Dred Scott case, Plessy versus Ferguson, and Brown versus Board. So you'll want to double check on that, but I think those are the only ones that are specifically mentioned in the curriculum framework. Not that other ones aren't there, and you shouldn't teach them, but those are the only ones that I think are like right there in the text. In terms of party systems, there are several party systems that your students need to know. So first party system being your Federalists and Democratic Republicans, second party system being your Democrats and Whigs, third party system being your Democrats and Republicans, fourth party system being Democrats and Republicans again, but slightly different. And so being able to know that, and then the influence of third parties, which essentially just means that they're splitting the vote when you have major elections. And so being able to identify those and who the major players are. So they need to know people like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, what their major key issues are. Oh, shoot, what's his name? Henry Clay, who like never dies in APUSH. That's like the running joke. Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, what their beef is, which is the National Bank for the most part. All of these types of things are helpful for your kids to keep straight in terms of politics and power. And this can be interesting, but a lot of kids are like, oh, laws. So it's good to bring in the political scandal, especially when you get to the Gilded Age. The kids love a good scandal. Grant's presidency, they just eat it up with all the scandals there, which is beautiful. Love me a good political scandal. America and the world is mostly Oh, there we go. Is mostly dealing with America and foreign policy. One of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is that they forget about Native Americans, which is so sad. Like, there are essays at the AP reading that I see all the time, because I've been an AP reader for the last 4 years. Yes, that sounds right. Is that when they're talking about foreign policy, there's these beautiful arguments that could be made about Native Americans in foreign policy, and they don't make them because they forget that Native Americans are foreign policy for a lot of our history, especially our early history. And so reminding students that Native Americans and the wars that we have with them and the treaties that we have with them are part of our foreign policy is really important. In terms of actual wars in America in the world, for the most part, College Board does not care about the actual nitty-gritty fighting. To be honest, when I'm teaching a lot of our wars, it's like kapow! And that's the extent that I'm teaching a lot of the wars. Now, our state standards require a lot of turning points and that sort of stuff, and I do teach those. Like Civil War turning points, like that's a big deal. Gettysburg, all of that sort of stuff. I do teach those, but I'm not getting into like the nitty gritty of like battles and military strategy for the most part. Like, we're not remaking the naval engagements of the War of 1812 because College Board doesn't care. And I'm not going to waste my time on things that aren't going to be on the test. So you need to be mostly focused on causes and effects of wars. For the most part, for that sort of thing. And of course, America's growing position in the world, how that changes as a result of these things. So, American regional culture. This is one of our new ones, which I really actually like that they split this. This is fun. So in terms of regional cultures, one of the easiest ways to teach this one early on, like I was saying earlier, is Native Americans and tribes. So all I need my kids to know for this, and you might require something different, especially if you have like rich Native American tribe or tribal histories around you in terms of your local history and your state history, tap into that. That's awesome. But all I need my kids to know is the tribal name, where they live, so what region they're from, and what their economy is based in. Because I'm feeling like that's what's going to be in an SAQ, if they're going to get an SAQ out of this. I also need to know who they're engaging with. So I need to know, or I need my kids to know that the Puritans are dealing with like Pequots and Algonquins, that sort of thing. Another way that we see this all the time is in the debates over sectionalism. And sectionalism isn't just pre-Civil War. We use that as sort of like our go-to vocabulary for that. But in the colonial era, you also have sectionalism. Like, people just call it regionalism a lot of the time for some reason, but it's the same idea that people from these different regions have these different cultures, and that makes them very distinctive. And so if you teach it as sectionalism the whole time, that's still this regional culture aspect that when we came into the American Revolution, we were not like one united front. We were very much different people. And so going into that from that perspective is where you tend to see this one. In terms of social structures, oops, we went back. In terms of social structures, these are a lot of times easy to see. So you see gender structures a lot of times. Racial structures are typically easy to see. In terms of nativism, who is white, who is not? That's always an interesting one. Posing the question to my kids, who is white at different parts of U.S. history, really sort of like, whoo, to their brains. And then the Southern social structure pre and post Civil War, we compare a lot of that. So who has power, who does not? And what does that look like pre and post Civil War is a good one for them. And so just really breaking those down at different points in time and saying who has power and why at those points. So those are our themes. Remember, if you have questions about any of the stuff that we're going over, please feel more than free to ask questions and ask a question thing at the bottom so I can make sure to answer those as we're going, because I know we're trying to trek through some of this so that I can get to your questions if you have those at the end. And then writing. So one of the things that I really focus on in my class is writing, because as I'm sure most of you are aware, writing makes up 60% of the overall AP exam, which is what really freaks out a lot of teachers, because teachers are like, dude, do you realize that I have to teach all this material, and I have to get my kids to learn all these skills, and I have to do pep rallies, and I have to do all of these picture days, and I have to do all of these other things. Like, do you realize how little time I have to do all of these things? And my answer is yes, I do, because I've been doing this for a minute. And so my solution to teaching writing is to do it in small steps every day, to scaffold things every day, but to write every day. So if you haven't seen this, the way that the APUSH test is run is that you have 40% of the test is multiple choice that is stimulus based. College Board has come out with their new test creation module thing where you can create multiple choice questions out of it. I haven't seen it since the very, very early stages of them developing it, but it's like their new favorite thing. So make sure that you're checking that out if you have done your course. Oh, what's it called? Oh, shoot. Now I can't think of the name. The thing where you have to do your syllabus and all of that sort of stuff. Now I'm drawing a blank. But make sure that you are checking that out when you are done with that process of getting verified by College Board. When you go through the test, or when your students go through the test, the first section of writing that they're coming to is the short answer questions. They will always go in this order. So if you're training students to write these things, you might want to train them to do it in this order, or at least to be familiar with seeing them in this order. Question 1 will always be an interpretation of secondary sources. What that means is they will get a quote here and a quote here from 2 different sources, and they will be asked to verify or find the difference in the interpretation of them. And then they will be asked for evidence to support person A's perspective. And then they will be asked to verify or find the evidence for person B's perspective. Every time. That is how it has been. And we're told every time that's how it will be. So that one you can train them to do with some sense of reliability. And they can be pretty comfortable that they know when they open the short answer question portion, that's what they will be confronted with. So they're not going to open it and be like, text. They should be prepared to see that and breathe. Part 2 is primary sources. This could be a single image. It could be a single quote. One year we saw two cartoons that were put side by side, and the kids had to compare them, which kind of threw us for a loop. That was fun. And so you never really know what you're going to get for that, but you do know that it's going to be primary sources. So first one's going to be secondary sources from historians or something from a history textbook, something like that. Second one is going to be primary sources, so something from an individual from that time period. And then 3 and 4, the students are going to get to choose between the 2 options of 3 or 4, and they're going to be non-stimulus based. So it's just, what do you know about these topics? They're going to be the same skill, but they're going to be different things. So students will have the option to choose between which one they're more comfortable with. Now, I tell my kids on this one, look over your SAQs before you start writing them. Answer the ones that you know first, which seems like such a duh sort of thing, but they always feel like they have to answer the first one in the booklet, that they have to do the interpretation one first, that they have to go question 1, question 2, and then pick 3 or 4. They don't. Answer the one that you know first in case you run out of time. And then the second part of that is their free response questions. So you have your DBQ, which you don't get a choice on. You just write what they tell you to. And then you get your LEQs. So you get an option between several choices, which are going to be the same skills. So they'll all be CCOT. They will all be comparison, or they will all be causation, but they'll be from different time periods. And again, students should look at these and figure out which one do I know the most about, which again seems like a duh thing, but sometimes students freak out about this and pick weird sort of things. So practice giving them options on those, because they do freak out under the pressure, which is funny, except it's not funny. So my philosophy of writing, which I actually stole from somebody else, this is not new, is that every time students are given something that they need to write, they should do it in this sort of order. It doesn't matter if it's an SAQ, if it's a DBQ, if it's an LEQ, it doesn't matter what they're writing. They should follow the ACE method, which is answer, cite, and explain. So every time you're following through, whether you are writing a paragraph for a DBQ, whether you're trying to analyze a document for a DBQ, whether you're doing a paragraph for an LEQ, or you're doing one of the points of an SAQ, you need to answer the prompt, cite your sources, and explain back to whatever your argument is. So follow that every single time that you're going through this process. And I put this on my wall so that my kids know that. Speaking of things on my wall, I taught last year, and I know a lot of people find themselves in this position. I taught last year in a district where students came into my class at a variety of writing levels. And so in order to sort of equalize that playing field and help a lot of students, I put writing aids on the wall. Sort of with the philosophy that students are going to be checking out and looking at the walls all day long anyway. So, hi, Glenn. If they're going to be looking at the walls all day, they might as well be looking at things that are going to help them in class. And so I created posters, which if you're interested in posters like these, let me actually, let's see if this will work. Okay, you should have on your screens, hopefully this works, at the bottom a link that opens up a Google Drive folder. Let me know in the comments if it doesn't work. That opens up these posters in a black and white version because I updated them for this year. But I made these posters that are essentially writing aids. So it teaches you how to do a causation essay, how to do a CCOT essay, how to do a comparison essay, how to do a DBQ, how to do an SAQ. And then I follow a specific thesis writing formula, which you don't have to, but my kids do because they needed the extra help with that. They needed the extra structure. And so the idea is that these are up all year long. Now, is that going to help them on the AP exam when they're sitting in the gym and they don't have these as an aid? No, of course it's not going to help them then. But they've been staring at these suckers for 9 months. So they're pretty much burned into the retinas at that point. And so they have it pretty much memorized. And so as an aid for these students, it really helps them with the structure. So it's one less thing that when they're already freaking out about writing these essays, they don't have to worry about. And so that really helps take the pressure off of them in terms of how to write the essay and how to structure the essay and focus more on what they're saying. And that was really helpful for a lot of my kids. So if you're interested in those, hopefully that link worked. If not, reach out to me on Twitter and I can email them to you. Oops. But in terms of writing every day, because this is really, I think, the most important thing here. I scaffold my skills for my students. And so we start off every day writing something. So I start off with reading checks for my students, asking them basic questions. So we do some multiple choice quizzes, but I also ask them open-ended questions that ask them to formulate an argument. Because at the end of the day, that's a lot of what the AP exam is formulating arguments. Can you form an argument and back it up with evidence? And so I will ask them a question about their reading that they did for homework, where they have to form an argument, just a very basic one, and back it up with at least 2 words from their vocab list. And so they're forming those sort of basic skills. And then in class, when we start to do short answer questions, I'm not really using the lengthy short answer questions that College Board is using. I use more simplistic ones that I have crafted. So this is an example of one from period 1. So I start this like week 1 in my class. This is a quote excerpt from Bartholomew de las Casas, where he's talking about the horrible, terrible things that the Spanish are doing. And so early on, I'm asking things like, what is the context of this passage? What is the author's purpose in writing this? So those things, those sourcing skills that they will eventually need for a DBQ, which we're not even going to write until Christmas, but those kinds of skills that they need to build up, we're going to start scaffolding in an SAQ, which they can very much write early on. So doing those sorts of things. And then we'll build up to more difficult SAQs later, because my kids will write like an SAQ every other day. So they have plenty of time to build up to more difficult short answer questions. So I give my kids these kinds of short answer questions. Sometimes they're quotes, sometimes they're pictures, sometimes they're cartoons, sometimes they're not stimulus based. They always have this box, which I still use the format from John Irish and his APSI here in Texas. The box is smaller than the one that they'll get on the AP exam. That's done purposefully so that they have to learn to make it fit in the box like a bunch of kindergartners. But that's done very purposefully and very intentionally. So that's scaffolding some of those very basic sort of skills there. It's also teaching them to be concise because they have to fit it in the box. And so that's sort of fixing that in their minds. The other thing that I do very early on is scaffolding for the DBQ. Now, we do not write a full-length DBQ until right before Christmas, but I'm scaffolding the skills for this starting with period 2, which I teach in my class early on. I know some people flip the curriculum to start with period 6, but we start that in the fall. And so what I'm doing here is I provide for the students an argument. And then I tell them on the back of this sheet of paper, there are 2 documents. You need to use those 2 documents to support this argument that I have given you. So in the lines that are there, they're going to write down the argument because that becomes the first sentence of their paragraph, which it will always be. And then they're going to use that argument and use those documents to support that. So we first do it in groups. What does this look like? And then we talk about, okay, we've learned how to do context and purpose and author's point of view and all of these different things from our SAQ that we did last week and the week before that and the week before that. And so they know how to do that already from those SAQs. Plug that into here and use that with these documents now. And so I'm teaching them how to do those argumentative document paragraphs for their DBQ now. So later when they write their DBQ, they can already write the body paragraphs. And then because we've already done our LEQ paragraphs with our thesis and our context, it's literally just plugging in the skills they already have. So when they get to writing their first DBQ at Christmas, they're not super freaked out because they've already been doing this the whole time. So a lot of it is building in scaffolding for these different kinds of things. And all I've done for this is gone back to the old College Board DBQs because they have them going all the way back to like the, 80s, 70s, something like that, and pulled from the 5 gajillion documents that they had on there and made my own shorter versions of DBQs. Sometimes it has 2 documents, sometimes it has 3. It just sort of depends on what they have going on there. So those are the types of things that they have available to them. So writing every day is not necessarily about writing essays every day. A lot of times APUSH teachers are like, oh my gosh, well, if I give them 35 minutes to write an LEQ, that takes up half of my class period or more. Or if I'm teaching a 50-minute class, then oh my gosh, that takes up my entire class, if not more, to write a DBQ. I don't have that kind of time. This activity with the skill scaffolding, I give them 10 minutes to do this. So that's 10 minutes in a 50-minute class. This DBQ scaffolding activity, I give them 15 minutes to do in their groups. That's 15 minutes in that class, which I think when you think about it in the large scheme of things is well worth it when you're doing that sort of stuff. Their chapter assignments that I give them in terms of their small argument stuff, that's 5 minutes that they have to write an argument and support it with evidence from their vocabulary list. And so that's 5 minutes every day that they're writing. And that's only 5 minutes that it's taking out of your class to get them in there writing argumentative statements and supporting it with evidence. And so it doesn't take a lot to get these things done. And you don't have to be writing an essay every day because that's not what it's about. What it's about is taking the skills, the argumentation, it's taking the evidence support, and it's doing those things every day, even if it's on a smaller scale. A lot of people ask me how I do my grading. I do grade everything my students write. Everything, every single thing. I never grade for completion because I don't want to reinforce bad behavior or not bad behavior, but bad skills. And so I grade everything that they write. So be conscious of that. But these are the rubrics that I use. Full disclosure, I stole these from one of my friends because hers were great. And so the top one is the one that I use for LEQs. And the bottom one is the one that I use for DBQs. These take up like, I don't know, like a quarter of a sheet, so I can save the earth and cut little slips of paper, and then I staple them to their essays. There are blank spaces left on these intentionally so that I can write stuff in here. So like if your contextualization was not great on your essay, I can write something in there as to why. So it was vague, or it was not enough. If your evidence was not great, I can write if there was something incorrect there, that sort of thing. For the DBQ one, this one actually looks very similar to the one that we use at the AP reading. So the little check mark boxes underneath document usage and sourcing, I put, instead of check marks for those, I will put things like POV. So like for sourcing, if a student got the author's point of view correct, I put POV so that the student doesn't just know, hey, I got the sourcing right for this document, but I got the point of view right, or I got the context right, or the purpose right, that sort of thing. So it's helping them know exactly what they got right and exactly what they didn't get right, so that when they come to do writing conferences with you, you do not have to sit there and reread their essay over again to be like, oh, crud, I don't know why I gave you a 2 on this. You can look at your grading sheet and say, yes, this is why you got this score, and this is why you didn't get these points. So that makes it easier for you, just sort of in the long run. Click, click, click. And then sort of general tips. My 3 biggest ones. Number 1, I just sort of like as a general tip would time everything that you do. The AP exam is timed, every section of it. So multiple choice questions are timed to 1 minute each for stimulus-based ones. In my class, if I am doing a multiple choice test that has College Board stimulus-based questions, I give them 1 minute for each of those. If it's a not stimulus-based question, like an old school College Board question that just has like 5 answer choices on it, I give them, it's like half a minute. It's what the old timing was, which was like 0.58, or it was like half a minute plus something. And so I give them less time for those. But I time everything because I want my students to get the sense of being on a timer. That's one of the things that my students at the end of the year are actually really grateful for over and over. And on their essays, I actually always give them less time than they would receive on the actual AP exam. So when they're writing an essay, instead of giving them, I think it's 35 minutes, I give them 25. I always cut everything by 10 minutes. And that's not to be cruel to them, although I think that they maybe feel that way. It's because when they get to their AP exam, no matter how prepared they are, these kids are going to be freaking out. Like they've been studying for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And a lot of these juniors are now taking multiple AP exams, and the APUSH exam is always like Friday of the first week. So they've just taken physics already, and they took like, I don't know, chemistry and like 2 other tests. And so they're exhausted and they're freaking out, and you know, they didn't eat a good breakfast that morning. And so these kids show up and they like hyperventilate for a minute. And so I want to give them time to hyperventilate for a minute because that's perfectly normal for them to do. And so I want to build in that time for them so that when they do those things, which are natural for them to do in that kind of environment, it's not taking away from their time. So that they have practiced doing that skill, doing that activity in less time than College Board is giving them. So time everything and put the timer on the board. Stress them out on purpose during the year so that when they're taking the exam, they're not stressed out. That's the number 1 thing that my kids came back and they were like, "Oh, Miss Donahue, we are so glad that you did that," because some of these other kids were in here like crying. And we were like, "Whew, we got this." 2, if something doesn't work for you, change it. People go to APSIs and get all of these materials. Like I understand the Google Drive's full of stuff that people were like, "Oh my gosh, I have this great activity that you should do. I'll send it to you." And like 50 people do that. And you're like, "I'm swimming in stuff and I don't know what to do with this." And that's a great problem to have. But like if something doesn't work for you and your kids, change it or don't do it. Don't feel like you have to do every single thing. And then 3rd, remember that the test is your job. Your job is not to like do super fun Civil War reenactment projects. Your job is not to be like a massive entertainer or anything for your kids. Your kids are trusting you to help them get college credit in an increasingly competitive environment. And so it's your job to do best by your kids, whatever that means on your campus, whatever that means for your kids. If best by your kids means getting them a 3, that's awesome. If best by your kids means getting them a 5, which is what Fiveable is all about, then get them that 5. And we are here to support you in getting them that 5. But do what is best by your kids, because your job is this test and their job is this test. And when you approach it from that angle, that's how you're going to be successful. And those are my general tips for the class. But most importantly, don't freak out. Nobody was born an awesome APUSH teacher. The greatest sort of advice that I got from somebody is that it takes about 5 years to really get used to APUSH. Your first year, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. So if you feel that way, that's perfectly fine. We're here to help you all year long. Other people are here to help you all year long. Your second year, you're like, oh my gosh, I survived. I can do this. And you sort of refine. And then your third and fourth years, you refine even better. And by your fifth year, you're like, I totally got this. And then you're off mentoring other people because you're such an expert. So we are always here for you. I'm not seeing any questions in the Ask Questions section. Does anybody have questions in the comments that you want to pose? Questions, comments, moral disagreements, allergic reactions as I pose it to my kids. I love all of our hellos from people. So nice. I love our poll. I could really use less PD and more classroom time. Isn't that the truth? Well, if we don't have any questions that people have burning questions, please remember to keep checking Fiveable for updates on stuff. If you discover later that you have a question specifically for me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Or if you're like, ooh, I wish I had one of those worksheets that I saw on your slides, feel free to reach out to me. I will send you any number of things. I'm perfectly happy to do that. But make sure that you are keeping track of our social media for updates because we will have tons of stuff for your kids as the year gets started. It's not just for the end of the year. It's not just to get them going for the APUSH exam. We've got stuff scheduled for the start of the year and going forward. And then, of course, stuff for you because we love you guys as well. So with that, everybody have a fantastic night. Keep track of all of the updates and have a wonderful year.